Face front, true believers. Welcome back to the Marvel Saga. This is episode 3. I'm Nicholas Prom.
And I'm Jerry McMullen. Nicholas and I have been rolling this out for a couple of months now, and we're taking a look at Marvel's anniversary comic from 1985-86, where they were looking back at the origins of Marvel Comics, called Marvel Saga, hence our name. Marvel Saga was trying to take all of the classic Marvel stories that we know so well, the origins of Spider-Man, the Fantastic Four, the X-Men, the Hulk, and put it all together in chronological order. And so we are going through issue by issue to reread these classic stories and just kind of comment on them and share our thoughts about the stories from that era. You can find this podcast on each of our podcast feeds. I am part of the Worst Comic Podcast Ever with my friends Colin and John, and we offer a weekly podcast looking at comics, movies, TV, and other pop culture items related back to the Four Color Funny Books. And Nicholas, what do you do?
Well, I'm the host of Comic Reflections, a podcast mainly focused on Silver and Bronze Age books, and we're coming back from our break very soon, and looks like Jeff and I are going to be covering some Legion of Superheroes stuff.
Ooh, that's awesome.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it. We've touched on the Legion here and there, but never really done like tons of coverage to them.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, whoa. There's no time like the present. I mean, considering the groundswell of Legion fans who are yearning for a new Legion series from DC and aren't getting one, it's time to I think push for that by raising the profile, talking about the Legion a little more.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We'll have to talk offline. I might be able to put you in touch with a pretty famous Legion artist. Maybe you could interview him for your show.
Which artist are you referring to? Mike Grell?
No, Steve Lytle.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I love his stuff.
Yeah.
He's like the artist on the book in its like last really great period, before
Ding. Yep.
Before the 5 years later stuff.
Mm-hmm. We're on the same page.
Oh,
yep.
Yeah. However, maybe we should get back into our discussion of Marvel.
Yeah, let's talk. Well, speaking of discussion, we actually got fan mail in since our last episode.
Oh, boy, we did.
We want to read that out and just provide some quick answers and give a shout out to the submitter here. It's Diablo Frank. Tell us about Diablo.
Oh, well, Frank is a pretty prolific podcaster and blogger and commenter on podcasts. He does the Rolled Spine family of podcasts, like the Marvel Superheroes, Idlehead of Diablo, which is the John Jones podcast and blog. He does the DC Bloodlines podcast, and he just started a Wonder Woman podcast, Diana Prince Wonder Woman.
Excellent.
So,
well, he sent us some feedback for episode 1, and I'm just going to read through it. He broke it down into numbered points here. Number 1, when Rolled Spine started the Marvel Superheroes podcast, my intention was to run through at least the major timely Golden Age characters in chronological order, mixed in with coverage of characters from other eras. That lasted for all of 2 installments, because the only episode I ever tried to go solo involved Khazar the Great, which became synonymous for any other instance of things going terribly wrong on the show. I read so many Human Torch and Angel stories for nothing, but it was ultimately for the best. Point 2, I don't think I've ever read Marvel Saga number 1, and I never bought an issue. I bought the official handbook of the Marvel Universe, and my brother bought Saga, starting with number 2, and I read his. I enjoyed Marvel Saga quite a bit, and it was at least as informative as Ohatmu, but even when I moved to a different state, I could never get past it being my brother's book to buy. I probably read less than half a dozen issues as a result, and am lesser for it. I don't remember the essential Marvel saga being solicited, and I can offer no excuse for skipping both volumes. I need to remedy that so I can read along with the show. Item 3. It sounds like at least the opening pages of number 1 had commonality with history of the DC Universe, but a lot less commitment to the full breadth of Marvel history. That said, the stated purpose was to cover the Marvel Age, which was still generally recognized as beginning with Fantastic Four number 1, not Marvel Mystery Comics back then. And aside, I considered calling our podcast Marvel Age, and still kind of regret not doing so. Point number 4, Ron Wilson's cover did not blow me away, but I liked the more Byrne and Layton influenced figures like Wolverine and Guardian. I would have been fine with it then, but today it irks me to have Mac Hudson treated as a contemporary of Tony Stark with a more advanced armor, though it doesn't feel so advanced after it killed Guardian. So that is some awesome feedback. And I think that was something we did comment on back with issue 1, that it was a little odd to have Guardian's story start so early.
Yeah.
But I also think that was trying to capitalize on the popularity of the Alpha Flight title at that same time.
Yeah.
And trying to maybe bring in some of those Byrne readers over into this book as well.
Yeah. I mean, I have a couple things to say about it. On that note, I feel like the Alpha Flight, it's like they were introduced in 1980 in the X-Men? Right around there?
The full team, yes.
Okay. And Guardian appeared a little bit earlier?
Correct.
Okay. The thing is, it's like those characters feel so like late 70s, early 80s. It's like it doesn't really, I don't think it meshes very well to try and shoehorn them into the Silver Age.
Correct.
And I don't mean it at all to disparage Guardian or any of the Alpha Flight characters. I think it's a neat concept. It just the vibe is really not terribly cohesive with what they're trying to retcon it into. Does that make sense?
It does, because the general timeline still remains. It seems like he started at a very early point. Then why did it take so long for him to become an active hero to where we saw him in the comics?
Right. Like, what was he doing all that time?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I don't know. I think I want to thank Frank for all that feedback he left us. Ron Wilson though didn't do any of the covers. It was Ron Friends.
Yes. Yes.
But Wilson did do some interiors in some of the that first issue, I think.
Yeah. And I think we get Ron Friends and Al Milgram in this issue number 3 that we're going to be looking at here today.
Yeah. Let's talk about the cover though for a sec. This issue was Marvel Saga number 3, was cover dated February of 1986, and according to Mike's Amazing World of Comics, it hit the stands November 5th of 1985, and we've got a great wraparound cover, penciled by Ron Friends and inked by John Byrne.
We don't see a lot of Byrne inks over someone else. I mean, usually when Byrne's doing inking, it's over his own work.
Right.
So this is a nice treat.
And I think it's very restrained because it really doesn't scream John Byrne a whole lot.
No.
It really does leave Ron Friends' style intact, and a lot of times inkers will overtake a penciler's style so much that it looks like they penciled it.
Yeah.
So
I see the Byrne influence on the Doctor Doom mask, and looking at the Spider-Man and the bad guy that shot Uncle Ben there. Spoilers, sorry. I see the Byrne look on those images, but everything else very much screams Ron Friends across the board here.
Oh yeah, yeah. Um, so yeah, a really nice montage cover. I like the wraparound, kind of giving us glimpses of Marvel's World War II era heroes, the Fantastic Four, of course, and Namor and Spidey.
Yep. All right. Well, let's dive in.
Yeah.
We kind of get a little bit of a recap here to start from where things left off last issue. With issue 2, we left off. Johnny Storm decided to burn the hair off a bum in the flop house and discovered that it was Prince Namor, the Submariner. So
Right.
Johnny, being the smart person that he is, immediately flies Namor up into the air and drops him into the ocean.
Yeah.
And at that point, Namor, who had been somewhat uh, like suffering from amnesia, he had pretty much forgotten who he was or had once been. All those memories come flooding back, so he immediately goes swimming to Atlantis, finds that Atlantis has been destroyed and the people are missing, and then comes back to the New York harbor where Johnny is still standing on the at the docks there, just waiting for Namor to return, and Namor vows vengeance against the human race.
Right.
And
Now,
that's where 2
yeah,
left off.
if we can back up a little bit, we have the
Absolutely.
um, we have some of the origins of Atlantis,
Mm-hmm.
and the true reason of why it was destroyed. We have an allusion to King Kull,
Yeah.
being like the founder of Atlantis or something like that. Or,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. That was the interesting tie-in, since King Cole is more associated with the Conan property. And
right, and they don't name him because it's a licensed book, and even though they had the Robert E. Howard license, they're like they knew that was something that could disappear,
sure.
and it wasn't a character created at Marvel, so they just kind of like allude to it. Um, but they also tie in the Deviants and the Celestials, which is something that Jack Kirby created in the Eternals series in the late '70s. Isn't that right?
Mm. Yes. Yes, that's one area of the Marvel history that I haven't read a whole lot of. I need to dive in and get into some of Kirby's work there with the Eternals and even 2001, and
Yeah.
just everything that he was doing, not Captain America related,
Right.
there in the 1970s.
Right.
I even really need to read Devil Dinosaur.
Devil Dinosaur is wonderful. It's a kid book. But it's so much fun. But I'm right there with you. I've read a little bit of 2001. I've read a little bit of Eternals. I got enough knowledge there to get by, and I can tell you
Sure.
that the art is beautiful. I love Kirby's '70s work. Um, Maybe best of all as far as just the drawing. Um, but yeah.
All right. Um, so we get Namor's origin story, where we find out that he is the product of a human man and a Atlantean princess.
Yeah.
That kind of like Romeo and Juliet, star-crossed lovers that neither one can live with each other, but they have that one night of passion, and that leads to Namor being born. And
Right.
Namor, call it revisionist rewording of it, but I mean, a lot of people consider him the first mutant.
I have always found that to be a rather tacked on distinction.
Sure.
Uh, let's take this character who's maybe not the most popular uh, and just kind of tie him to our most popular thing, the X-Men.
Well, and that's exactly it. I mean, that kind of occurred as the FF was falling out of popularity over the last 10, 15 years, where FF wasn't a mainstream, wasn't one of the Marvel's top titles, and Namor has had his own title at different times, but it's never succeeded at a level that the management probably would have liked it to have. So
Yeah,
how do we find a way to incorporate Namor as a regular character that we use on a more ongoing basis? Well, let's look at his origin and make him a mutant, and then suddenly he's part of the X-Men family of books.
which it's never sat right with me because it just feels so forced, and it doesn't really make sense for someone to be, uh, you know, the product of two different races, neither of which have really the mutant thing going. If
Sure.
if Captain Mackenzie had been a mutant, that would have made sense. But he was just
Correct.
a normal human.
Yeah.
And I know normal humans have the potential for the mutant gene, but that was not ever demonstrated to my knowledge. And I get it. This is them trying to find a way to make Namor more popular and more palatable. I mean, considering he's a very popular guest star, but he'd never been an A-list book since the Golden Age.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely. All right. So within Namor's origin here, and again, this Namor is a character that dates back to the earliest days of Marvel Mystery Comics. He was one of the first heroes that came about along with the Human Torch, and in fact, Namor and the Human Torch, that was one of the first superhero crossover team ups ever.
very true.
When they appeared in Marvel Mystery Comics number 8 and 9, that
Yeah.
was the first time that two different heroes had crossed over in the same story. Um, so,
Does that precede the Justice Society?
um, Marvel Mystery Comics number 9, which some of that is included in this issue, came out July of 1940. I would need to look up the early days of the Justice Society. Um,
Let me look that up real quick while you carry on.
yeah, yeah. Um,
I should have prepared
so
this.
no, no worries. I mean, people know what they're getting when they're listening to us.
Gee, thanks.
Fun talk.
That
Fun
is
talk.
faint
Yes.
but damning praise, Jerry.
Um, anyway, what we get here is another part of the revisionist history, which came about in the 1970s, was that there was a team of Marvel heroes that fought during World War II called the Invaders. And Namor and the Human Torch were part of it, along with Captain America and Bucky. You had the Human Torch's sidekick of Toro. And they primarily fought in the European front. You also had other characters that got involved, like Miss America and was it Spitfire?
Yeah.
Union Jack. There was a host of them. It was a concept created by Roy Thomas, and it was a popular series in the 1970s, and has been revisited from time to time.
Yeah.
Probably more to keep the copyright in place than anything else.
Yeah. So I do have an update on that.
Yeah.
Marvel Mystery Comics number 9 was published July 1st, 1940.
Okay.
And the Justice Society of America debuted in All-Star Comics number 3, which is winter of 1940 and 41. So you were correct. The Namor and Torch team up or fight is the earlier team up or crossover, whatever you want to call it.
Okay. All right. I feel good.
Yes.
I'm grinning ear to ear. I have learned something along the way
Yay.
of all these years of reading. So we find out more about Namor and Atlantis. We meet some of the people that would be quite popular within the Namor's book. We meet his cousin Namorita. We meet his love interest, Lady Dorma, who would come in and out of his life. It's interesting. We'll see this later on in this series. Namor develops an infatuation for Susan Storm of the Fantastic Four, and there's oftentimes Namor is is having to choose between Lady Dorma or Susan Storm as to who would be the object of his affections.
Yeah, and in the sad irony is he would end up with neither.
Correct. Um, so we get more of the Lantis backstory. We see how it all fell apart, and this is the panels in this are coming from the Submariner series that ran in the late 60s into the early 1970s,
Right.
where we're getting this backstory filled in to help tell this story.
Yes. And so a villain named Destiny wielded the Serpent Crown, and I think he wanted to either take over Atlantis or something like that, but ended up destroying it and causing Namor to go into his amnesiac state.
Mm-hmm. And that Serpent Crown would resurface many times over, primarily in the pages of like the Defenders and the Avengers.
Wasn't the Serpent Crown the MacGuffin in the Atlantis Attacks storyline from the 1988 annuals?
I believe so. That has been a long time, and I've tried my best to forget that storyline. No, and for those that aren't quite familiar, the beginning around that time with that Atlantis Attacks, Marvel started doing summer-long projects that would tie in across all of their annuals. And so if you want to read this storyline, it would involve 15 to 20 books that were all higher priced because they were larger books to begin with. And a lot of times those crossovers may only barely mention whatever the ongoing story is. And so there were times you would buy these issues and feel like you had wasted $1.50 of your money that could have gone to 2 or 3 smaller normal size issues that really didn't advance the big overall story plot. So I tended to get a little gun shy of the Marvel annuals and the DC annuals, because DC was doing it as well.
Yeah.
But around that time, I really got disillusioned with the concept of the annuals, just because it was turning into a large marketing gimmick.
Now, let me ask you something, Jerry.
Mm-hmm.
Would you prefer these big event crossover books that just kind of bleed fans dry, and would you prefer them to be an annual summer event, and that's the only time they do it during the year, or would you prefer that over the way it is now, where like every 3 to 6 months we have an event that will change everything, and you have to buy like 30 different books for 6 months?
I might be interested in the former approach that you listed there, if it just so you know that it was self-contained to that one event or that set of books.
Yeah.
My concern is, and I see this a lot today, because I do still read a lot of the newer books, is that there are titles that are rolling along just fine, and then they get sucked into whatever event of the month is going on, and it derails that book for a month or two. And so then later on, I'm looking at my collection. It's like, why am I holding on to those 2 issues? I really don't like those 2, but I've also got the entire run of this series. Do I keep those 2 just so I can say I have the entire series? It makes for puzzling questions. And,
right. Yeah, like I'm trying to put together a Firestorm run right now, and and there's this event that has to do with Checkmate and the Suicide Squad. It's like the Janus directive, I think.
Yes, I remember that one.
And I'm like, I'm really not interested in reading Checkmate at all, but I feel like when I get that run together, I'm gonna have to go and pick up that storyline.
And you're gonna feel like you'll need to get all of those individual pieces, and it is troublesome. One of the jokes that we make on my podcast quite a bit with Cullen and John and myself, we all came of age with reading, and in particular getting our driver's license in the mid 1980s, right around the time that the Millennium event came out.
Ugh.
And of course, we fully drank the Kool-Aid on that one, and we bought into it. So for 8 straight weeks, we alternated who would drive up to Clint South at the Metcalf South Shopping Center, so that way we could ensure we would go up after school on, I believe comics were coming out on Thursdays then, go up after school on Thursday and buy all the crossover issues. Each of us would buy all of the crossover issues because we were certain that this was going to be a spectacular story and that these issues would skyrocket in price, and we were so wrong.
Yeah, and the thing about Millennium is, like, the main series is so boring, and it commits the cardinal sin of these events is having major plot points happen in the tie-ins.
Yeah,
and from what I've read, the tie-ins, the issues I've read, are way better reads than the actual Millennium series itself.
Agreed.
And not only that, it ends up being an event that was ultimately meaningless and had like really no impact. It introduced the New Guardians, which was a book that was canceled within a year. And the only thing that I can think of that ended up being a consequence of Millennium was screwing up the Laurel Kent storyline in the Legion of Superheroes. Because she was set up to be a descendant of Clark Kent, but was revealed to be a Manhunter robot. And it also makes no sense, because if the Manhunters were defeated in the 20th century, why would there be a Manhunter sleeper in the 30th century still around to screw things up for the Legion?
That's always been an issue whenever you try to include those titles that include the titles of an event where those titles don't take place in the same era.
Yeah.
Because I had that same issue with Crisis on Infinite Earths crossing over into like All-Star Squadron and Legion.
Right.
If it's happening at this one fixed point in time, why is it suddenly going across all time? Why didn't we see those red skies 5 years ago if it's happening across all time?
Right.
Just things like that. So
I can understand Earth 2, and so All-Star Squadron being tied into it because it's on a different vibrational plane, and maybe the timeline isn't, like quite aligned symmetrically between that and Earth 1. You could go with that. But the Legion, wherever they are, as in the future, whatever's going on with them should be a result of whatever has happened in the past, and so these new ongoing events shouldn't affect them. So we had to have
Earth 2 point. To that Earth 2 point, you also had Infinity Inc. going on at the same time with the Red Skies.
True. So yeah, what a pain. And and I feel like the Legion of Superheroes is the book that keeps getting screwed by the events.
Yes.
Because John Byrne's post-crisis reboot of Superman, there was never a Superboy, and so never a Superboy who had adventures with the Legion. And so they had to come up with that whole pocket universe thing.
Yep.
Which
no Superboy to inspire them to come together as a team in the first place.
Exactly. And that already wrecks the idea, because they had to do the pocket universe, that already wrecks the idea of, we're not going to have a multiverse anymore. It's going to be one Earth.
Yeah.
What a mess. What a mess.
Yeah. I think we've got the makings for a new podcast here. where we point out the comic book plot holes.
Post-crisis regrets with Jerry and Nicholas. I like it. Hey, what's going on with Namor?
Yeah. Well, let's get back in. Destiny caused the amnesia. Namor lives a life where he's in the flop house long enough to grow the full beard that Johnny can then burn off and get us to where we're at now. Namor is back in action. He's mad at the human race. So he goes and awakens this giant sea creature called, appropriately enough, Giganto, which is like this larger-than-life whale-type creature with arms, and he kind of lumbers onto the earth. And so Ben Grimm gets into his head that the best way to stop this creature is to strap an atomic bomb onto his body, go walking into the belly of the beast to plant the bomb, and then hightail it out of there as quick as possible.
Now, I have two things to say about this.
Sure.
One, the bomb on Ben's back is so cartoonish.
Yes.
It's huge, and it's like they pull this out of Mighty Mouse.
Mm-hmm. It looks like a bomb that was like left over from World War One.
Right. Yeah.
That you just kind of dropped from a plane and hoped that it hit the target nearby.
Right. Yeah, and never mind that an atomic bomb is going to have radioactive fallout and stuff. But okay, you're going to blow up a giant whale monster from the inside. Okay. Mm-hmm. Let's say just for a minute that it just, kills its organs and it doesn't pierce the skin and whatever, everything is there and whatever. Because comics. Yeah. There was an incident on the Oregon coast in the 1970s wherein there was a beached whale. Mm-hmm. I can't remember if it washed up dead or if it beached itself and then died. Well, as it started to rot, it was gross, and the authorities were like, well, how are we going to get rid of this? And somebody got the bright idea, let's blow it up. Let's dynamite the whale carcass, and that'll, help us get rid of it, whatever. That plan did not work out as much as they intended. It just ended up blowing large chunks of whale blubber all over the people nearby. Mm-hmm. and they still had much of the carcass that they had to try and move with tractors and things.
Yeah, rather than it being self-contained in one unit, it was spread out all over the beach.
Yeah. Now that explosion is on YouTube, and I can send you the link to that, Jerry, if you want.
Nice, that would be awesome.
Okay.
As we said, comic books.
Yeah.
The bomb does work. Ben gets out of there. The creature is destroyed. Apparently, the odor isn't that bad for the people of New York. Sue, in her invisible form, has stolen the horn of Proteus that Namor was using to control Giganto, and that's when Namor first comes in contact with Susan Storm and instantly is smitten by her beauty.
Yeah.
And now he's got to change his plans. Everyone is dead except for Susan. Susan is under his protection, but he still wants to kill everyone else. And of course, Susan can't agree to that. I mean, she loves her brother. She loves Reed. She kind of tolerates Ben at this point. She wants to stay part of the Fantastic Four. She understands that undersea life is probably not the best place for her or her fancy hairdos.
Right.
So Namor again is fighting the Fantastic Four, and Johnny ends up creating like a vortex of air that sweeps up Namor in this fountain of water and throws him out to sea, and Namor disappears for a while, because that's how you quickly bring a comic book story to an end, is just sending them out to sea.
Very good.
But, it's not going to be the last that we're going to hear of Namor. We're going to be reading a lot about him in the upcoming issues.
Oh, yes.
But this is a good time for us now to switch over and look at one of the other characters that's been introduced, which is the Incredible Hulk. You want to run with this?
I'm sorry?
Do you want to introduce the Hulk here and run with these pages?
Sure. Yeah. So Bruce Banner and Rick Jones decide because the Hulk transforms, or Banner transforms into the Hulk at night.
Of course.
They decide to build a secret cave prison for the Hulk that Banner can lock himself into this vault at night and then be released by Rick every morning at dawn. And somewhere along those lines, I don't think that works.
No, no.
Um,
And that's always been a thing in comic books that has puzzled me, is think about the logistics that would be involved to put something like this together. I mean, admittedly, Bruce Banner is a smart guy, but he's not a structural engineer by any means. And to be carving into a cave, I mean, it's the same principle with the Batcave. How is Bruce Wayne and Alfred getting all of this equipment loaded into the cave, getting electrical conduit run so you can power everything and put in lights and all this? I mean, the logistics behind this just never adds up when you really start to look at it closely.
Oh yeah, I mean the manpower that Banner would need to carve out this cave and build all this stuff is just ridiculous. And never, not to mention that Rick's whole life would have to revolve around guarding the Hulk every night.
Yeah, and the money to get this equipment, where is it coming from? The guy's on a government contract. He's not making tons of money doing that government work.
Yeah. But at any rate, the Hulk ends up fighting the Toadmen.
Yes.
The Tributites.
The aliens happened to be hiding in this cave that they were going to use. And the Toadmen have plans on invading Earth. This was like their test camp to kind of get the Earth prepared for the big invasion plans. Conveniently, the moon comes out and Banner undergoes his transformation.
Yeah, and this is like the second alien invasion in a matter of weeks, because the Skrull invasion, which was thwarted just a little while back from in the Fantastic Four.
You know, it's funny because in the 70s, early 70s, when we got the Kree-Skrull War, it kind of came about that it was revealed that Earth kind of seems to be in the center of the universe, so to speak, in that it's in the flight path of a lot of popular routes getting from point A to point B.
Right.
And that's why so many alien races happen to land on Earth or encounter Earth, that it's in their natural travels of going to the places that they want to get to.
Right.
So the Hulk manages to stop the Toadmen, which, again, that's not a scary name. I mean...
Well, and they're these diminutive little guys with, like... Their helmets look like they're something out of, like, a high fantasy novel, not science fiction, too.
Yeah. I mean... These look like the guys that would be LARPing on their weekends off or something.
Oh, they look like the goblins from the Rankin and Bass Hobbit cartoon.
Mm-hmm.
Which I know this precedes that, but...
But it's a point of reference.
Yeah.
So... and of course at this point, once Hulk has stopped the aliens, we get that moment where Betty Ross sees the Hulk, and she's just terrified and scared of the creature. And at this point, I think Hulk still has some Banner memories in there, and he's struggling, knowing that the woman that he loves can't stand his Hulk, and he's always going to be hounded by mankind because he's perceived as this threat no matter what he does to help humankind, like stopping alien invasions from the Toadmen.
Right. I gotta say though, this early part of the Hulk's career, he's such a jerk. He's not very sympathetic.
Yeah.
And it'll take a little while once we get to the Hulk smash era, where he's much more sympathetic. Because he just wants to be left alone. seems like a nice guy that just doesn't want to be bothered.
Yeah. Now, the beauty thing about this, and again, comics from the 1960s, reoccurring theme is radiation.
Oh, love it. Best stuff
They
on earth.
stop the Toadmen by shooting a radiation ray into space at the oncoming invasion fleet, and it just scatters the ships across the universe.
What I don't understand is, like, what the Tripotites, this interstellar, or this race with interstellar travel. What, they've never encountered radiation? They
Yeah.
and they wouldn't have had anything to defend themselves from that?
For that matter, if they're getting that close to Earth, you gotta imagine that they're getting bombarded by the cosmic rays that created the Fantastic Four.
Well, right. I mean, but wasn't that a cosmic
Yeah.
ray storm, or is it a ray belt?
I think I've heard it both ways.
Yeah, depending on the what is needed for the story.
Yeah. Because I was even just rereading some Fantastic Four issues this past week, and in the late 70s, Reed had completely lost his powers.
Oh, that's
and
right.
So to regain his powers, he went and shot himself back up into space and exposed himself to cosmic rays again. So under that theory, I would view it that there's some kind of belt of cosmic rays that encircles the Earth that would allow him to pass through, or I don't know. It is a puzzler.
Yeah. Well, how come John Glenn doesn't have superpowers?
Well, that and how every other spaceship that's come or gone from Earth ever since, why haven't they been impacted by cosmic rays?
Right.
There's, I think back, the X-Men went into space numerous times. And it was when they came back that Phoenix was created, and that they never got impacted by cosmic rays. The Avengers have gone to space. It just comics. Yeah, comics, radiation. Don't ask too many questions.
Yeah. So we leave the Hulk.
Yes.
And drop in on back in on the Fantastic Four, where Doctor Doom drops a net on top of and around the Baxter Building.
Here's the deal. Doctor Doom is going to become probably, by my estimation, the greatest Marvel villain of all time.
I would agree with that.
Unfortunately, this is one of the most lamest first appearances of all time. He's trying to capture the building by throwing a net over it,
which is crazy.
From a helicopter, and the helicopter looks like a shark.
Oh my gosh, it does. Yeah,
and he's gonna communicate to him by yelling out the helicopter, like he's gonna be heard over the rotors of the helicopter.
Well, it's like he picked up all this equipment from the supervillain surplus store.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We're on a budget, okay?
Yeah. All right. What can I get for $40? $40 is my budget. What do you have that I can use?
Well, we've got this shark copter. How about a giant asbestos net to throw around a building?
Yeah, exactly. Because Johnny can't burn through it. That's the first criteria. Make sure it's got asbestos, so Johnny can't get through it. So, and what's amazing is they've never heard of Doctor Doom, but Reed recognizes the voice. He knows that voice. He realizes it's his old college roommate.
Who they weren't even roommates.
Yeah, college contemporary.
Right.
Contemporary at college. Yeah.
And so then
and I think Reed wanted to room with Victor, and Victor wanted a private room or whatever.
Yeah.
So Reed got assigned to Ben Grimm, because
right.
you want to put the rocket scientist with the jock athlete.
Of course.
Yeah.
So then we segue into the origin of Doctor Doom.
Mm-hmm. And that is that his origin has been built up and elaborated on over the years, where, initially he was trying to rule this land that was, once controlled by, I believe it was his father, and then they started working in that his mother had mystical ties, that she was a witch, and so there are times when you have Doctor Doom explore his mystical heritage, trying to master the dark magic, so he can be one with his mom and actually free his mom's spirit, who I believe his mom's spirit is under the control of like Dormammu or one of those type villains.
Yeah, yeah. I think it was Mephisto.
Mephisto, that's right.
Because
That's it.
you remember the Triumph and Torment graphic novel with Doom and Doctor Strange? Love
exactly.
it.
One of great story.
Oh, it's
Great
awesome.
Story. So, we get Doom's origin, and we get to the point where they end up at a state university in America, where Reed Richards meets Victor Von Doom, and doesn't want to be roommates, doesn't want Reed looking over his notes. Reed even tries to point out, hey, you missed a decimal point here. It's going to screw things up. Doom's never wrong. Doom doesn't make mistakes. Not simple math mistakes. No, you can't be possible. And that's how Reed Richards is stuck rimming with Ben Grimm.
Right.
Victor Von Doom is so confident in himself, he goes ahead with these experiments. Whether or not the university approves of them, he's going to do them.
And
he's going to do them in his dorm room.
Right. And it's, what was the invention was like interdimensional travel communication device.
Mm-hmm.
It's got like a beauty salon hair dryer.
I know.
That goes down
to say,
with a chair and a lever in the middle, and then like it's wonderful Kirby machinery. But it's crazy.
Yeah. And he actually Doom hires a underclassman to help pull some switches for him while he's in the contraption. Something goes wrong. We never hear from this assistant again. We don't know if he was blown to pieces like the whale was pages earlier, or if he just got out of there relatively damage-free. What's funny is when we see Doom next, he survived the explosion, but he is bandaged head to toe in gauze and claims that he suffered horrible scars to his face. And that's always been the ongoing question, is just how scarred is Doom's face. One of the stories says that it was horribly scarred, and then one of them says it's just a real small, simple scar, but Doom's vanity is so great that scar appears magnified to a point where he can't stand to look at the side of his own face. Yeah. And that's why he wears the mask all the time.
Yeah. Now, about the lab assistant, though, there is a little blurb that says he had minor injuries.
Minor injuries. Okay. Yeah. All right. So he got out of there.
Yeah.
Life lesson learned.
Yeah.
Don't go on as an underling to a potential mad supervillain.
Right.
So in the origin,
heed the warning signs.
Yeah. In the story that we're given here, we see Doom, and he's got the one little scar.
Right.
Or, I mean, decent sized scar, but it's not like his whole face is horribly burned or disfigured beyond recognition. So he leaves humanity and goes off in search of ways to repair his face and repair his life, and he ends up with these mysterious cave dwellers, like in the almost like the Tibetan mountains or something. That it's someplace. It's kind of implied that it's like Far East, almost along the lines of where Doctor Strange went with his training and along that line. But they help him prepare an armor to wear as he's going through the training, and he's he feels that he's got to put the mask on before it has fully cooled.
Right. So if his face wasn't that mangled before, it's totally messed up now.
Yeah, let's put hot iron on your face and let's see what that does to flesh. And that's how we get the stories in his origin about his face being completely burned and disfigured is because of the mask.
I always liked the element of him being too impatient and they don't want to incur his wrath, and so they give him the mask. I love that.
Yeah, exactly. And it definitely, I think that's part of what makes Doom such a good villain, is that his own need to get it done right away ends up being his downfall so many times. You know, for all of his scientific genius, the science should tell you that you need to follow the plan and let it play out before you intervene. And he can't wait to intervene. He's got to speed things along or do things slightly different. And if he was just patient and let it work, he would be in charge of the world. He would rule the world. But he's his own worst enemy. It's not Reed Richards and the Fantastic Four. It's himself that ends up being the downfall for all of his schemes.
Well, and because Victor Von Doom can't accept his own character flaws or flaws as wherever, he has to project them onto Reed as somehow it's his fault when things go wrong.
Exactly.
And yeah, his impatience and lack of being able to cooperate, everything he does whenever he works with other people is so underhanded. Mm-hmm. It's often his undoing. That it seems to be the way.
Very much so. So we get back to the story, and at this point we're looking at Fantastic Four number 5.
Yeah.
At this point, he's captured the Fantastic Four because he threw a net over their building.
Right, and takes him back to his castle in the Adirondacks.
Yeah.
He has one stateside too, a castle.
Yeah. Well, you know, when you travel, you want the same level of accommodations wherever you go. And so he's got in his head that he needs Blackbeard the pirate's treasure.
Right, because you're a super scientist sorcerer, and you need a box with a bunch of gold and jewels in it. Makes perfect sense.
And much like Namor, he's holding Susan Storm back as a prisoner, and he's sending the 3 guys back in time on a time platform machine that Doom has created to go get Blackbeard's treasure. Now, mind you, if you're so smart to create a time machine, there are ways you can go and manipulate the markets to make money. You don't have to go steal Blackbeard's treasure.
Well,
you can just go back in time and buy shares of stock of a particular company at a very low rate and just wait for it to mature.
Right, or why doesn't he go back and prevent his disfigurement? Why doesn't he go back and prevent the deaths of his parents?
Yeah.
I mean, we know that doesn't work because of time paradoxes, because if he fixes a thing that ruined his life, quote unquote, by the time the timeline catches up, there'd be no reason for him to have gone back in the first place, and so it corrects itself.
Yeah.
But the hubris of Doom, you would think he would at least try.
Absolutely. So
I love the time platform, though.
Yeah. And we get one of these crazy time paradoxes with this story is the 3 guys are sent back in time to the era of Blackbeard, and they're on the ship, but Blackbeard's nowhere to be found. And of course, Ben Grimm, being an orange, rocky, clay-like guy, has to disguise himself. So he dresses up like a pirate, complete with the fake beard, and he becomes Blackbeard. That is the Blackbeard of history, is Ben Grimm trying to disguise himself.
And he talks about, as the story goes along, he talks about, I'm the one who started the legend of Blackbeard. But Blackbeard wasn't a legend. He was a real guy.
Yeah. Exactly.
It's not like you're saying you started the legend
Reed is.
Oh.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, Reed, being the smart guy that he is, he's listened to what Dumas said, and Dumas said, "Bring me back Blackbeard's treasure chest." All right, I'll bring it back the chest, but it's going to be empty because you didn't ask for the treasure; you asked for the treasure chest.
Wow.
That that's sure to annoy Doctor Doom, but by the letter of the commands, he's followed the instructions.
Yeah. I feel like that is such a Weasley way to get out of a thing. Like it just it comes across as such a Silver Age DC kind of plot
Hmm.
point. Like, oh, you didn't say to bring back the actual treasure itself.
Yeah, yeah. So what's funny is Doom is so shaken up by finding this treasure chest that's just filled with chains rather than gold and other precious gems that he allows Ben Grimm to get close enough, and Ben just wallops him. Uh, Almost a precursor to the it's clobbering time days.
Yeah.
And it turns out that this Doom that they've been dealing with is a robot.
Yeah. So
So he's created time machines and he's created robot duplicates of himself. But still, the guy can't figure out how to fix his face.
and he needs that pirate treasure so bad.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
it,
So
it's just like a 1960s Superman story. Lex Luthor gets out of prison or something and uses a giant robot to steal like $100,000 from a bank.
yeah,
It doesn't what?
yeah.
So
Why not just go ahead and take all the money? Why just limit it to 100,000?
well,
You know?
I just chose
Yeah.
that number arbitrarily,
Yeah, yeah.
but like
Sure,
the
I
robot would
know.
be more expensive than the amount of money you stole.
Exactly. Okay. So we're going to leave Fantastic Four for a while now, and we're going to look over on the ventures of Peter Parker, who's becoming a TV star. He's pretty
Yeah.
popular. He does the different variety shows. I'm sure he's on the lights of Ed Sullivan and shows along that lines, and trying to make a living collecting appearance fees by just going on shows and doing his tricks.
Yeah.
And he's leaving a show one night, still fully dressed in his costume, and there's a guy running by being chased by a security guard saying that the guy's a thief and asking for Spider-Man to help stop him. And Spider-Man's a little full of himself. Hey, I'm not getting paid to do that. I'm not going to risk myself. It's your job. You're the security guard. You take him down. And the guy runs off, and Peter Parker basically says, "Hey, I'm looking out for myself. I'm number one. I don't have to do anything."
Right.
So we flash forward, and um, one night in the future, he's coming home, and there are police cars surrounding the home of Uncle Ben and Aunt May that he lives at. And it turns out that Uncle Ben has been shot during a perceived break-in robbery or something. But don't worry, son. Don't worry. We've got the killer cornered in this warehouse, and we're going to get him out. But maybe if the moon goes behind the clouds, the guy might be able to escape. And Peter's going to have none of that.
He
So
says,
he gets into
Peter says, I know the old Acme warehouse. It's been deserted for years. What is the bookworm Peter Parker? When is he spending all this time in the warehouse district?
yeah.
How does he know this?
He went to the warehouse district to get to the science experiment that they allow people to go in and get exposed to radioactive spiders with no concerns.
Oh, right, okay.
Everyone knows about the warehouse district. Hey,
Yeah.
comics. Yeah.
So anyway, he goes to the warehouse and slips past the cops and corners and clobbers the robber.
Yep. And he gets them pinned and pulled him into light, and he realizes it's the guy that he let run by him a couple of weeks ago. That he had the chance to have stopped this guy before he killed Uncle Ben. And now Peter has to live with that guilt for all time. That, with great power comes great responsibility.
Yeah, that's got a nice ring to it.
Yeah, you know, I bet we could reuse that over and over and over.
You think people won't get tired of it?
It's kind of catchy. Seems to work.
Well,
It's
I'll
got
give
some
you that.
legs to it. Yeah. So we're reaching the end of the issue here, and it's time that we tease by looking in at a new introduction to the Marvel Universe, and we're going out to Upper New York State, to Westchester County, where there's a mansion uh, with a gentleman there by the name of Charles Xavier. And it's kind
Hmm.
of a creepy looking place. The newspaper delivery boy, who apparently has full access to ride his bike up to the front door of this mansion,
Right.
um, he delivers the papers there, but he never sees anyone there. What's going on? Who's getting these papers? Who pays for this place?
Right.
Um, and we see Charles Xavier, and we get hints that he's in a wheelchair, and he's overly concerned about the issues with mutants, the aforementioned mutants that we talked about earlier. But it's becoming a dark day in America and in the world for mutants, and he's got to do something. He can't stay in hiding anymore. He's got to help mutants by leaving for Washington.
Yeah, and so that's where we leave off this issue, and
Yeah,
next month we'll have it's going to be pretty X-Men centric, um,
yeah.
and also have the Mighty Thor and more stuff with Doctor Doom, the Submariner, and the
Doctor Doom
Fantastic Four.
and the Submariner as they team up.
Yeah, um,
Yeah.
they are the they are one of the greatest villain duos. They're
Hmm.
they're they're right alongside Luthor and Brainiac, um, to me.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. In fact, I think they they work better than Luther and Brainiac, or even like Luther and Joker. That's one that gets used a lot too. But I to me, Namor and Submariner work on a different level because they're both viewed as monarchs of their land. They don't necessarily view themselves as a bad guy. They view themselves as being in the right at all times.
Yeah.
Um, and they feel that whatever it is that they're trying to do, they're within their legal rights, their monarch rights. That they don't see anything morally wrong with what they're trying to do, whatever the task may be.
Very true. I mean, their sense of entitlement knows no bounds,
Yep.
um, and they make for a really interesting pair of characters. I gotta say, I do like Namor better as a villain or at least an anti-hero than a straight
Hmm.
superhero. I think he's just more interesting that way. Um, because he's one of the great brooders in comics. Okay, and he sure loves his revenge schemes. Um, so yeah, I don't know. It's
All right. Um, one of the things that I always try to do is do a quick rundown of where these um, what issues were used to kind of put together the Marvel Saga,
right.
and where you can go to find or read some of these issues. Um, a lot of the Fantastic Four and Namor stuff um, came from Fantastic Four numbers 4 and 5 and Annual number 1, and those are all masterwork, omnibus, essential, epic. Some of the Doctor Doom material came from Fantastic Four 278, which can be found in the Fantastic Four by John Byrne omnibus. We've also got some of the Submariner information came from his own comic, number 1, number 8, and number 51, which is in both uh, the Essential, and the Marvel Masterworks. Some of the early Submariner information that we talked about came from Marvel Mystery Comics number 9, and that can be found in the Golden Age Omnibus and Golden Age Marvel Masterworks. Incredible Hulk number 2 can be found in the Hulk's line of books, Omnibus, Masterwork, Essential, Epic. Same with Amazing Fantasy number 15 to conclude the Spider-Man origin. That's all in the Spider-Man books. This little tease of the X-Men that we saw came from X-Men number 38, which in the beginning with that issue, number 38, the X-Men book, they started doing shorter stories with the main cast, and then they started doing backup stories that would run 6 or 8 pages, starting to tell the origins of each of the different members of the X-Men, beginning with Xavier first, and then working through Cyclops, Beast, Angel, down through the line. So that's why we're not necessarily starting with X-Men number 1 quite yet. We'll probably get some of that next issue. So, and I think that's most everything that was used in this book.
Yeah. Do we want to wrap up here, Jerry?
Absolutely. I think this is a good point. We will be back next month with issue 4. In the meantime, we would encourage each and every one of you to follow both of our podcasts. You can get this podcast on each of our feeds, but we would encourage you to go out and subscribe to the other one's feed. I think if you like what I do on the Worst Comic Podcast Ever and with my Essential Showcase blog, I think you are just going to love the work that Nicholas does with Comic Reflections, and vice versa. I think if you're a big fan of Nicholas's work, come over and give my podcast a try. We really want listeners. I mean, yeah, that's what we're really doing. No, we're doing this for fun. I mean, we enjoy talking comics, and we would do our podcast whether we had 1 listener or 100 listeners or 1,000 listeners. 1,000 listeners kind of gives us a little more encouragement, but we would still do it just for the 1 listener.
Yeah, I would agree with that sentiment, Jerry. The Marvel Saga is a co-production of the Worst Comics Podcast Ever and Comic Reflections. Until next time, Excelsior!
Stand a little straighter, walk a little prouder, be an innovator, laugh a little louder, go forever greater, we can show you how to, and when will you be then? You belong to the Merry Marvel Marching Society. March along to the song of the Merry Marvel Marching Society. If you growl, if you groan, with the dour, sour outlook, if you howl, if you moan, you can lose your sour throat from keeping trim and in step with the vim and outstep of the Merry Marvel Marching Society.
Be an early riser,
Strive to be ambitious,
speak a little wiser,
try to be judicious,
be a good advisor,
never ever vicious.
and when
Will you be then?
Face front! Lift your head! You're on the winning team!
You belong to the Merry Marvel Marching Society. March along to the song of the Merry Marvel Marching Society. If you growl, if you groan, and your score is merely 0, do not howl, do not moan. You can be a superhero marching right along to the fighting song of the Merry Marvel Marching Society. Stand a little straighter, walk a little prouder, be an innovator, laugh a little louder, grow forever greater, we can show you how to